Motion means a proposal by a senator that the Senate thereof or committee do something, order something to be done, or express an opinion concerning a matter. On the agenda for this session, under the Question and Answers to Questions segment, Minister without portfolio in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, Pearnel Charles Jr., is to respond to item number 2 on the question paper on behalf of Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade and Leader of Government Business, Kamina Johnson Smith, notice of which was given by Senator Dr Floyd Morris. Also on the agenda, 2 pieces of legislation are down to be discussed. The Public Procurement Set-Asides Order 2019 will be tabled. The Airport Economic Regulation Expansion Fund Manley International Airport Regulations 2019 will be tabled and taken. In general, the Act will enhance the foundation of the terminal for sustainable industry and secure air operators through market expansion and improved regulatory environment. Under private members' motion, debate is to continue on the private members' motion on the implementation as an interim measure the required adjustments to provide access to Gordon House to persons with physical disabilities, while at the same time proceeding expeditiously with the establishment of a new Parliament building, which is fully accessible to persons with disabilities on lands identified for this purpose at the National Heroes Park. And that's what's on the agenda. It should be noted that elements of the day's agenda can be changed or moved. But before we go, here are a few things you should bear in mind if you plan to attend a session at Gordon House. No visitor shall create any act of disorder within the precincts of the House. No visitor shall be admitted to the House without first obtaining an admission card from the office of the clerk. Visitors who remain within the precincts of the House during a suspension of the session are asked to keep silent. No photography, videography, or sketching of the proceedings is allowed unless authorized by the presiding officer, and there should be no smoking inside the parliamentary building. Now over to the proceedings.
Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate today are the following. Minister Paper number 67, entitled Office of Utilities Regulation Annual Report for the year 2018-2019. The Public Procurement Set-Asides Order 2019 and the Public Procurement Set-Asides Order 2019 Resolution under the Public Procurement Act. The Airport's Economic Regulation Expansion Fund Manley International Airport Regulations 2019 and the Airport's Economic Regulation Expansion Fund, Manley International Airport Regulations 2019 Resolution under the Airport's Economic Regulation Act. The first supplementary estimates for the financial year of 2019-2020, the Fiscal Policy Paper for the financial year 2019-2020 Interim Report, estimates of revenue and expenditure public bodies per supplementary 2019-2020. The National Housing Trust, Housing Benefits Special Selection, Fort Hill Estates, Hellshire, Phase 3 Housing Development Order 2019. The National Housing Trust, Housing Benefits Special Selection, Darlington Grove Housing Development Order 2019 under the National Housing Trust Act. The Access to Information Cabinet Documents Extension of Exemption Period Order 29. The Access to Information Cabinet Documents Extension of Exemption Period Order Resolution 2019.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Bills brought from the Honourable House of Representatives. Petitions. Papers. Reports from committees. Notices of motions given orally.
Mr. President, let me first crave your permission to speak from a seat that is not my own. We have a long day today, Mr. President, but hopefully we have a lot of work today, rather, which we can do in a short time. Put it that way. Well, I know we are all moving. Skeffrey has been on a roll since yesterday. Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move the Airports Economic Regulation Act, the Airports Economic Regulation Expansion Fund, Norman Manley International Airport Regulations 2019 Resolution. Mr. President, colleagues, the Airports Economic Regulation Expansion Fund, Norman Manley International Airport Regulations 2019 Resolution as follows. Whereas Section 4.3 of the Airports Economic Regulation Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, provides that where an airport is subject of economic regulation under the Act, the provisions of Section 24 of the Airports Authority Act, power of the Minister to reassign authorities' functions, shall not apply to that airport, and the Minister may authorize the Airports Authority to enter into arrangements for the airport or parts thereof to be operated by an approved airport operator on such terms and conditions as the Minister may approve. And whereas Section 4.6 provides that the Minister may by order designate a person to operate an airport or parts thereof as an approved airport operator for the purposes of this Act. And whereas PAC Kingston Airport Limited was designated the approved airport operator for the Norman Manley International Airport by the Airports Economic Regulation designation of approved operator, Norman Manley International Airport, PAC Kingston Airport Limited, Order 2019, and whereas with the authorization of the Minister, the Airports Authority entered into an arrangement on the 10th day of October 2018 for the Norman Manley International Airport to be operated by PAC Kingston Airport Limited on terms and conditions approved by the Minister. And whereas under Section 21, subsection 1 of the Act, the Minister may make regulations generally for giving effect to the provisions and purposes of the Act. And whereas under Section 21, subsection 1 of the Act, the Minister made the Airports Economic Regulation Expansion Fund, Norman Manley International Airport Regulations 2019. And whereas Section 21, subsection 2 of the Act provides that regulations made under Section 21, subsection 1 shall be subject to affirmative resolution. And whereas it is desirable that the Airports Economic Regulation Expansion Fund, Norman Manley International Airport Regulations 2019 be affirmed. Now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as the Airports Economic Regulation Expansion Fund, Norman Manley International Airport Regulations 2019 Resolution. And 2. The Airports Economic Regulation Expansion Fund, Norman Manley International Airport Regulations 2019 is affirmed. Further, Mr. President, I beg also to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move the following motions.
Sorry, Minister. Do you intend to give notice that at a later stage today you will move for the suspension of the standing orders to take this motion?
I intended to, but I can do so now.
Pardon?
Yes, I'll do
so.
So
Okay.
I'll do so now, President. I'll do so now.
Okay.
Yes. I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Thank you. You can move to the next one.
Got it. Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move the following motions. Be it resolved that the National Housing Trust, Housing Benefits, Special Selection, Fort Hill Estates, Hellshire Phase 3 Housing Development Order 2019, under the National Housing Trust Act, which was laid on the table of the Senate on the 27th day of September 2019, be referred to the Regulations Committee of the Senate for consideration and report. Be it resolved that the National Housing Trust, Housing Benefits, Special Selection, Darliston Grove Housing Development Order 2019, under the National Housing Trust Act, which was laid on the table of the Senate on the 27th day of September 2019, be referred to the Regulations Committee of the Senate for consideration and report. Mr. President, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motions. Mr. President, I also beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move the Public Procurement Act, the Public Procurement Set-Asides Order 2019 Resolution. Whereas, by virtue of Section 60, subsection 1 of the Public Procurement Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, the Minister may make such regulations as he thinks fit to give full effect to the provisions of the Act, and without prejudice to the generality of the foregoing. Regulations may prescribe provisions in relation to A. Procedures, standards, and criteria for the various methods and subject matter of procurement. B. The establishment, management, and operation of an electronic procurement system for the public sector. C. The bidding process and procedures. D. The provision of bid security, performance security, and any other security required in connection with procurement proceedings and the execution of procurement contracts. E. Special and differential treatment measures. F. The procedure for the reconsideration of the actions and decisions of procuring entities. G. The procedure for the review of the actions and decisions by the review board, including its powers to make interim or ancillary orders. H. Provisions in relation to fees. I. Forms including the standard forms of contracts, bidding documents, pre-qualification documents, and any other public procurement related documents developed by the office for use by procuring entities. And J. Any other thing required to be prescribed under the Act. And whereas on the 3rd day of July 2018, the Minister made the Public Procurement Regulations 2018 pursuant to paragraphs A, C, D, E, and J of Section 60, subsection 1 of the Act. And whereas it is provided by the Section 60, subsection 2 of the Act that regulations made under paragraphs A, C, E, F, and G of Section 60, subsection 1 of the Act shall be subject to affirmative resolution. And whereas, on the 3rd day of July 2018, the Public Procurement Regulations 2018 were affirmed by the Honourable House of Representatives, and whereas on the 13th day of July 2018, the Public Procurement Regulations 2018 were affirmed by the Honourable Senate, and whereas, by virtue of Regulation 46 of the Public Procurement Regulations 2018, the Minister may, by order, subject to affirmative resolution, specify any set-asides to be applied under the regulations, and the order shall include A, the description of the categories or types of Jamaican suppliers who are to benefit from the set-aside, B, the terms and conditions of the set-aside and the manner of its application to the Jamaican suppliers specified under paragraph A, and C, the matters that a Jamaican supplier needs to satisfy to demonstrate to a procuring entity that the Jamaican supplier is qualified to benefit from the set-aside. Now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable Senate as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as the Public Procurement Set-Asides Order 2019 Resolution, and 2. The Public Procurement Set-Asides Order 2019 is affirmed. Mr. President, last on our list for the notices of motions given orally, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move the Access to Information Act, the Access to Information Cabinet Documents Extension of Exemption Period Order 2019 Resolution. Whereas it is provided by Section 6, Subsection 2 of the Access to Information Act that the exemption of an official document or part thereof from disclosure shall not apply after the document has been in existence for 20 years or such shorter or longer period as the Minister may specify by order, subject to affirmative resolution. And whereas on the 5th day of September 2019, the Minister made the Access to Information Cabinet Documents Extension of Exemption Period Order 2019, and whereas it is desirable that the Access to Information Cabinet Document Extension of Exemption Period Order 2019 be affirmed, now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable Senate as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as the Access to Information Cabinet Documents Extension of Exemption Period Order Resolution 2019, and 2. The Access to Information Cabinet Documents Extension of Exemption Period Order 2019 is affirmed.
Thank you, Minister. Questions and answers to questions? Senator Morris.
The Honourable Minister for the answers to the questions that I have tabled in my name.
Minister, you have answers?
Just to indicate, Mr. President, and to my colleague, Senator Morris, that the answers have been tabled and they will be deliberated at a later date when Minister Kamina Johnson Smith is here.
So you have tabled them?
I believe they were handed to you.
Okay.
Well, I believe they were handed to Senator Morris before.
But they would need to have been sent to Senator Morris by the appropriate method. Okay.
Got it.
So the question you're asking that the answers, although the answers are being tabled, you're asking that the discussion concerning them be postponed until Minister responsible is available.
Respectfully, Mr. President.
Okay. I take it that's okay with everybody.
That was agreed.
Thank you very much. Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sitting of the Senate. motions for leave to introduce bills, the presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained, public business. Minister.
Mr. President, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
The question is that the standing orders be suspended to allow the minister to take the notices of motions which were raised earlier. In favor? Against?
Grateful, Mr. President. Mr. President, colleagues, the airport authority matter will be treated with first. And just to give some background to the matter, the Airports Authority of Jamaica is a statutory corporation. It is responsible, Mr. President, for the long-term planning, the oversight, operation, and the development of prescribed airports in our country. It advises the government of Jamaica on air transport policy issues. The AAJ operates, Mr. President and colleagues, within the broader context of the government of Jamaica's transport policy, which itself is a subset of the overall economic policy. The government of Jamaica has chosen the mechanism of public-private partnerships to achieve the required level of capital expenditure and development for the airport sector. To that end, the Sangster International Airport was privatized in 2003. The Manley International Airport is currently in the public-private partnership transition process. The current process for the privatization of the Manley International Airport began, colleagues, in March 2017, when a request for qualification of bidders, along with an information memorandum, was issued. Mr. President, following the pre-qualification and the bidding process, Grupo Aeroportuario, I destroy their name, del Pacifico, SAB, the CV, we'll call them GAP for short, emerged as the preferred bidder in September 2018. And on October 10th, 2018, the AAJ entered into a concession agreement with PAC Kingston Airport Limited, PACAL, which is a special purpose vehicle, Mr. President, registered by GAP in Jamaica for the management and operation of the airport. Now, Cabinet, by way of Cabinet Decision number 1718, dated 2018, May 14th, gave approval for the issuance of the final concession agreement for the management and operation of the airport, including also the completing of the plan, modernization and expansion of the airport facilities, and also, Mr. President, to improve the efficiency of its operations. In the approved concession agreement, certain undertakings were provided to the prospective bidders, one of which is the undertaking by the AAJ to procure certain legislative amendments to permit the new concessionaire to operate the airport. Failure to amend the relevant pieces of legislation would delay the implementation phase of the concession and could result in significant penalties for the AAJ and, by extension, the government of Jamaica. So, Mr. President, when the government embarked upon the privatization of the major international airports in or around 2003, a legislative framework was created by passage into law of the Airports Economic Regulation Act, and several regulations and subsidiary legislation promulgated thereunder. At that time, the Sangster International Airport was privatized, and the government of Jamaica created a commercial entity to operate the Norman Manley International Airport. And that company, which is the Norman Manley International Airports Limited, is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Airports Authority of Jamaica. The scheme of the legislation was to designate the airports that will be subject to economic regulation by the Jamaica Civil Aviation Authority, which is the JCAA, and also to designate the entity that will be permitted both to operate a designated airport and to levy charges such as passenger service fees at such an airport. Accordingly, the Norman Manley International Airports Limited, which is the company that was created, was designated as an airport subject to economic regulation, as an airport operator, and granted permission to levy charges at the airport. In order for PACAL, which we spoke of before, which is a special purpose vehicle registered by GAP in Jamaica, in order for PACAL to assume the operation and the management of the airport in keeping with the terms and conditions stipulated in the concession agreement, that private entity, Mr. President, must be legally authorized to do so. And this requires the repeal of the existing regulations and orders, as well as the promulgation of new orders and notices. The agreement between provides for a period of 12 months for the satisfaction of these conditions precedent, which must be met or waived prior to PACAL being able to take over the operations. One of the critical pieces of legislation is the Airports Economic Regulation Expansion Fund, Norman Manley International Airport Regulations 2003. The existing 2003 regulations allow for the collection of the airport improvement fee at the airport by the NMIAL to fund certain capital improvements and for the debt financing in relation thereto. But, Mr. President, with the termination of the concession agreement between the AAJ and NMIAL, which is scheduled to take effect on the 9th day of October of this year, new regulations are required for us to allow for the collection of the said fees by PACAL. The new regulations, which are titled the Airport Economic Regulations Expansion for Norman Manley International Airport Regulations 2019, will grant PACAL the legal right to collect the AIF from passengers departing from the airport on behalf of the government of Jamaica for the aforementioned purposes. Mr. President, let's be very clear. So PACAL's only role in relation to the fees will be to collect same and to deposit it in the government of Jamaica's expansion account for the use by the airport authority in keeping with its senior loan obligations under facility and loan agreements with the European Investment Bank, as well as the CDB and Petrocrete Development Fund. So it is on this basis that the lenders are now to provide non-objection to the handover of the airport to a new operator. And that is why this is very critical. Mr. President, the Airports Economic Regulation Expansion Fund, Norman Manley International Airport Regulations 2019, as well as the Airports Economic Regulation Expansion Fund, Norman Manley International Airport Regulation 29 resolution have been prepared by the very experienced and professional Office of the Parliamentary Council, pursuant to Section 21 of the Airports Economic Regulation Act, and they are laid before this House. Mr. President, I want to, before we move forward, just to say that a lot of work has been put in, particularly by the council and other officers at the relevant ministry, many of them who are here. And we just want to thank them for the hard work that they have done to bring this forth and the hard work that they continue to do. I submit this to this Honourable Senate for our approval.
Thank you,
Mr.
Minister.
President.
Thank you, Senator Fraser-Binns.
Thank you, Mr. President. And just as my colleague is succinct, it is hoped that I too will be as succinct as I express on behalf of our side our support with some concerns, with some questions for the resolution that is before us. Mr. President, I want to really carve my presentation using an article from the Jamaica Gleaner of October 11, 2018. And having read this article, there are some questions, Senator Charles, which came to my mind, and I am hopeful that your response will grant me some ease. In this article, it stated, and you will allow me, Mr. President, to just go through it. It stated that the public-private partnership will see GAP, for short, managing, financing, and operating the airport. And I wondered, Minister, whether this operation is coming from or will be funded through this fund that we're speaking about. I also wondered if you were in a position to tell us exactly how much is in this capital fund, if any, and whether this fund that you're seeking now to transfer to GAP, as I understand it, and which we will be built up on under the management of GAP, how is it envisioned that that will be utilized? There are, and this article also spoke to it, that GAP will be in charge of undertaking certain capital works as agreed upon by the partners. And I wondered whether these capital works will be funded through this fund, this particular fund, or whether GAP, in the agreement with the government of Jamaica, would have presented or would have brought to the table its own funding for these capital works. In addition to which, Minister, speaking of capital work, if you could help me to understand in the normal course of things prior to GAP, what capital works would have been funded through this fund. And that, of course, you'd appreciate has a lot to do with my concern, which I hope you will allay, that this capital work, this modernization of the airport that is to be done, that GAP is actually coming with its own fund for that modernization, and that it is not relying solely on the fund, fees collected and put in this fund for the modernization of the work. I continue the article. It says that under the terms of the agreement, the government will receive a percentage of the gross revenues earned at NMI, at Norman Manley International Airport. And I wondered if you could just help me to understand what percentage was agreed upon between the parties that the GOJ, the government of Jamaica, would be entitled to. And secondly, I could not glean from your presentation nor my own research whether or not the handing over has been completed, or is that you're in the process of handing over, is that there was a preliminary period between last year October and this year October. That I'm not sure of. But if in fact the handing over was done, if you could help me by sharing whether or not the government has been paid the percentage of the gross earning and what percentage. So there are two questions. One, what percentage of the gross earning was agreed to in the contract? And secondly, if the handing over process was completed or has been completed, whether or not the government has been paid its percentage and what percentage was paid. If it has not been completed, if you could just help us to understand where in the process we are of that handing over process. Yes? The article also stated that there will be agreed capital work. Right. The article also stated that a part of the agreement was that there will be a capital work program to be completed within the first 36 months of the concession agreement. And I want to find out, Minister, whether or not that process, and it impacts, this question impacts on the response you give to the one I asked prior, but whether or not any of those capital work have started. Because from my calculation, 1 year, 12 months would have gone out of the 36 months. And if my assessment is correct, if you could let us know whether any capital work has commenced, and if not, when do you estimate that the work will commence, and perhaps some of the works that have been agreed upon between the government of Jamaica and GAP. Mr. President, I raised those very specific issues about the fund, but I want to raise another issue that relates to the fund, but not as directly as the questions I raised. And I will read something in the article. It says, underscoring the critical role of the aviation sector to tourism and the service sector, Minister Montague explained that the decision to privatize the airports was based on a thorough analysis of the options for achieving modernization and development of such national assets. The part I want to underscore here is where he says, underscoring the critical role of the aviation sector to tourism. I raise that because in the last couple of days we have been having more than normal rainfall. And we have seen and we have heard about the effects, the very negative effects that have been happening on our roads, particularly, not limited to, but for our purpose, particularly the main thoroughfare to the airport. So we have seen the videos, we have heard what has happened in Harborview and that main stretch from Windward Road into the airports. And I wondered, Minister, whether there is any contemplation. We know, before I go there, we know that in the last administration, there was a plan to rehabilitate the whole thoroughfare from Windward Road into St. Thomas and beyond. We haven't really heard much of that. And so I wondered whether there's any contemplation by the government to implement a real modernization of this thoroughfare. And not just a thoroughfare, but we're talking about the housing as well, we're talking about the land space, we're talking about the harbor. And if not, I am recommending that some of this money, if the law permits, and if the law does not permit, perhaps you can seek an amendment, be utilized specific for that purpose. Because you see, when the airport is closed off, and if you recall, I think it was Hugo, when the airport was closed off, I think it was Hugo, for a couple of days, a day or two, then what happens is that our tourism sector, our economic sector is impacted. And partly because of the road condition. We know that coming out of that major hurricane, I think it was Hugo, we had, through the help of the Chinese, worked on the Palisade Strip, and we see the big rocks there ever so often, which reminds us of what happened. But outside of that, there still remains a lot of work to be done on our roadway. And so I am recommending that, particularly because of the changes that have taken place in the environment, and because from what the scientists have said, weather conditions are not going to improve, but they're going to become even more extreme. And because we rely so much on tourism, and because access to our airport is so important, then I believe that in the contemplation of development of the airport, that it should not just be limited to the actual physical plant, but it should be expanded to include access to the airport. And so I'm recommending, Minister, that there be some I know for today's purpose that can't be done, but certainly from where you sit, you are indeed the person who can take that recommendation to the Prime Minister and to the Minister, that there be some contemplation as to how we can utilize this fund to help us to achieve the objective stated by the Minister, given the critical role of the aviation sector to tourism. And finally, the issue, I want to also make a recommendation that we contemplate in our development making our airports earthquake ready. There is no doubt that throughout the Caribbean we have been experiencing, well, we have been feeling, because the Met Office will tell that we have a lot of earthquakes or tremors over the years, just that you don't always feel them. But in recent times, throughout the Caribbean, we have actually been feeling these earthquakes. And we know where the airport lies in terms of its geography. I am recommending that in the development and the modernization of the airport, that a serious focus be given to ensuring that it is earthquake ready. I know that there are buildings in Jamaica that have been built specifically to deal with earthquake, where you have one section, you know, there's a whole science that governs them, and I'm sure from where you sit, you're aware of some of those buildings. I think the BOG is one of those buildings. And so I am proposing that some of this money be utilized for that purpose as well. That being said, I don't believe we have any challenge in giving our support to this resolution, but we ask that you answer some of the questions that we have laid before you, and that you pass on our recommendations to ensure that these monies that are now going to be collected by a foreign entity, that they be entrusted and that they be utilized in a way that is transparent, that only augurs well for national development and sustainable development. If it pleases you, Mr. President.
President, I take it nobody else on that side is going to be contributing. Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Fraser-Bin. Senator Brown.
Yeah. No, I won't be long today. Mr. President, let me say that once again, the opposition has extended our cooperative effort to the government. While it has been said, let the country know that it's only yesterday the opposition was told that these resolutions would be debated. That runs contrary to the standing order unless we move, as we did earlier, a resolution to take it today. It's an important set of resolutions. The government knew from last year, October, when they signed off with the Mexicans, that today would come. That a day would come when they need to have brought it to the Parliament. And it's consistent with the Chaka approach to dealing with governance, that at the last minute, at the 11th hour, we're asked to support this resolution. And we are. And we are. Because contrary to the view that this divestment started in 2017 or thereabout, Minister Charles. It's a long time we have been trying to divest Norman Manley. And that brings me, Mr. President, to why it is important to be consistent in policy direction. In 2003, we divested, we were in government then, we divested Donald Sangster. You're long around, Mr. President, to recall that one leader of that side made the comment that soon Jamaicans will need visa to enter Jamaica because we put foreigners in charge of the airport. But what we were doing was taking steps to develop the airport, to expand the airport, to bring more tourists and locals into the country, to make easy for development and growth to take place. As prior to that, we had developed the North-South, North Coast roads network, which brought a number of investment in the country. That's part of the 18 years that you don't like, you know. But that's part of the 18 years. The roads, water too, the hotels, telecommunication, those things we did to carry our country forward. And we took the criticism, including from Mr. Golding, that we had divested Sangster, and soon Jamaicans would need visa to come in. Doesn't matter. Don't need no visa for Jamaica. No, none for Jamaica. But what is important is that you were wrong in that assessment. And I'm happy that today you are showing a different approach. In fact, you're using the same model that we use at Sangster. Not only the same model, but you're using the same company today. When our intention was not to use the same company for both airports, because we give them more power than we need to have. Would have preferred a different company running Sangster, Norman Manley. But it is what it is. Point I'm making is we must be consistent in policy position. You can have one policy in opposition and a different policy in government. One to catch the vote with PR. And when you come and face the music, you have to do the same thing that was done. So I put that out there. Mr. President, in the resolution we got last night, and only last night, so we have not the chance to go through it and really respond in the way we want to respond. Since my sister, Senator Fraser Binns, raised some questions. This is about using the tax we tax travelers who depart this country for what we call the Airport Development Fund. Every time a Jamaican or a tourist go through the airport, going away, they contribute to what is called the Airport Development Fund. That money is now collected by the government at Norman Manley. It is that money I understand why we have to pass this, Senator Charles, that is going to now be collected by the Mexicans. The Jamaican people need to know that you're asking the Mexicans to collect what we used to collect. And I guess we have to pay the Mexicans for doing that. You so criticize Montego Bay. You so criticize Montego Bay. You know, hugging up the model. You know, hugging up the model. But the country needs to know that you criticize it then and you're hugging it up now. Because if it was so bad, you'd have taken a different approach. But you're taking the same approach, either out of laziness, copycat, or something else. Or maybe you will say the then PNP government knew what was good and best for Jamaica. You have to pick the choice. You have to pick the choice. Mr. President, so that fund, which is supposed to be audited by the Auditor General annually, we don't have a sense from your presentation, Minister Charles. How much in the money? How much in the fund? I don't think you know. We don't know how much is likely to be collected, Senator Webby. That's something that the Jamaican people, through this discussion, needs to know. And it is not enough for me that in the other place they didn't talk about it. Because I don't follow what the other place don't do. I follow what is our obligation as a review chamber to do, which is to say how much money. Leave him. Let my friend Ronnie quarrel with himself. What I want to know is how much is it, how much money you have collected last year, the year before, this year, how much you project to collect for this from people traveling? Because that increased airline ticket. I would hope that would get to the point where it would reduce airline ticket costs. So, we'd like to know how much in the fund, because that's important to the people. Why are you taxing us when we travel? And now, is it the money that we pay that is going to develop the airport that the Mexicans are going to use? How much money the Mexicans bring into the table of this development? We need to know how the public-private partnership split. Is it that they're just going to come, take our watch, or rather take out our wallet and take our money and fix it up and collect the bag of that? We need to know. So yes, we're going to support you on the resolution, even though you brought it at the last moment, but there are some things the Jamaican people need to know. So President, on page 2 of the regulations, it mentioned financing agreement. It says financing agreement means a loan or facility arrangement agreement for the development and expansion works at the Manley International Airport. Entered into by the Airports Authority or the MIA Airports Limited, a limited liability company incorporated under the Companies Act. And it speaks to some agents here. One strike me as the European Investment Bank, the Caribbean Development Bank, or the Petro-Carib Development Fund. And I'm struck by the Petro-Carib Development Fund because just recently we took a decision in this Senate and in the other place, and therefore as part of government, to put the Petro-Carib Development Fund into the consolidated fund, into the general budget. And what that means, when we took that decision, Minister Charles, is that any liability, and I raised it when we discussed this, any liability would now fall to the taxpayers of Jamaica because they have now embraced the Petro-Carib Fund. Is it true that as last February 2018, the debt to the Petro-Carib Fund was 32 million US, or 4.3, sorry? 32 million, I said. After. Just leave Ronnie alone. Ronnie just come to be mischievous today. Okay. He's entitled to that.
He's under the weather.
He's entitled to that. You see what they say? Let me just segue. The other day they say, you're not going to get a headline about the taking pictures in court. I don't need no headline. The media's taking. Mr. President, stay out of the frame, please. Please. You interfere in the debate too often. So I made that point.
I only interfere when I see the thing running off the track, So just
no, nothing running off the track.
Senator Bryan,
nothing running off the track. If you don't interfere, we'll get you quicker. I was tempted to talk about the supremacy of the rulers in light of the court decision in England. So I'm asking, $4.3 billion liability of the budget to the airport authorities. Is that the case as part of the financing agreement? Will that is this a money? No, I'm ignoring Randy, man. Is this a sum that the consolidated fund is due to pay out? We need to know. The country needs to know, because we took a decision that the liability of the Petro-Carib funds would fall on the back of the taxpayers of this country. Is there money available for this payout? In fact, the total owed to European Investment Bank and the CDB amounts, it appeared to me, like 86 million US dollars. 86 million US dollars. And now for the billions, because we're talking Jamaican. That's 11.6 billion Jamaican dollars. Is the airport improvement fund sufficient to meet this? Will we need to increase the airport improvement fund? What is the financing arrangement for this expansion? It is important that we know this, so that we know we're taking wise decisions and we're not just follow fashion. You see, Mr. President, I know you're going to intervene, but the Prime Minister of England took them down a fixed date election, and these wanted to follow fashion and fixed date election. So I want to know if we're going into a follow fashion approach here. Or is it that you... I don't mind it, because I'm equating myself with you. I'm equating myself with you. But what I want to know, President, as we support this, is what are the financing arrangements? How much from the Mexicans? How much from the taxpayers of Jamaica? How much from the travelers to expand the airport? And I see you're saying this is a 25-year agreement with a possible extra 5 more years, 30 years. The people of Jamaica need to know. I am glad that in the end, whether the Mexicans have Norman Manley and Sangster, that we will not need visa to come to Jamaica. Sure. The Jamaican people are resilient. They're not bowers. They don't bow. They're resilient. So we don't need visa to come to Jamaica. And I am glad that history has absolved the correct decision of the previous government in doing what was right for Jamaica. May it please you, Mr. President.
I should defer to Senator Bryan.
I think the problem is the seat.
What do you mean by that? Yeah. That seat is a good seat.
Thank you.
Mr. President and colleagues, as we wind down...
1 minute, please. Thank you, Senator Brown.
Yes, Mr. President, colleagues, of course I want to firstly thank my colleague, Senator Fraser Binns, for her contribution. And also Senator Brown. There are a number of questions that have been asked, and I will attempt to answer those questions as best as possible, as well as to clarify. So, Senator Fraser Binns, you referred to a number of things in relation to the public-private partnership and asked whether or not it will see gap managing, well, it will see gap managing and financing the airport, but you wanted to know more about the capital fund and also whether or not GAP would bring its own funding. And permit me to try to give a summary that should clarify for you. So the new airport operator, which is the PAC Kingston Airport Limited, which we call PACAL, will be required to secure and obtain its own funding to finance capital works. Okay? And you had asked that question, it clears that up. The fee that we're speaking about, which is the airport fee, will not be available to the fund in relation to the mandatory capital works. PACAL's only role, the only role here in the AIF scheme is collection of the fees. And that is collection from the departing passengers, and thereafter they remit the said fees to the government's expansion account for them to be used by the Airports Authority of Jamaica to finance the 3 senior debts which I had laid out in my presentation. Right? And you know that was procured to expand the airport in 2007. Now those funds have been used to expand the terminal building and to improve certain utilities, and the utilization of the funds again are those funds provided by the lenders, and we listed them out. You also asked about the government's share, and so I'm advised that the government of Jamaica the share is 62.01% of the concessionaire's gross revenues, which include both aeronautical and non-aeronautical fees. 0.01%. Now, whilst the concession agreement was signed in 2018, you know, we have a year, so hence the alacrity with which we are putting it to the Senate. The commencement date was scheduled for 12 months, right? So we're moving towards that date, and we have to get these arrangements solidified before same. After the execution date, which was then 12 months, for all of the parties, the Airports Authority and PACAL, to satisfy the conditions precedent, which include the passage of the regulations, which we are all supporting today. Now, again, to clarify, the capital works to be undertaken by PACAL, and I believe also Senator Brown asked about this too, as described in the concession agreement, are the extension of the runway by 300 meters, I believe it is, the implementation of the runway end safety area, which is critical, utilities upgrade of the wastewater systems, incinerator, stormwater systems and such. So very critical upgrades which will be required. Let me make it very clear, because it was also asked, no, PACAL will not be paid to collect the fees. And Senator, you asked about the amount in the fund. I'm advised that it is at 76 million US in the fund. Of course, yes, that's what I'm advised. 7.6? Oh, I was being kind. 7.6. A bit generous. I take correction well. Now, again, so we're clarifying.
He's given us smooth presentation,
not chaka-chaka. So, prior to the handover, which is soon to come, PACAL will be required to pay the Airports Authority an upfront fee of, I'm advised, US $5 million, and thereafter a concession fee monthly of the 62.01% of the gross revenues that we spoke of. Okay? You asked about that. All right. Finally, in terms of clarification, PACAL will receive funding in the amount of 127 million from its shareholders, which is GAP, to fund the other things that I described before, the runway extension and other works to be done. Yes, sir. US. All right. I hope that clarifies what you asked. Senator Brown, you went into a few other things which I am unable to answer some of your questions. I don't think anyone can perhaps answer all of your questions.
Senator Fraser-Beans was asking for a verbal commitment to raise the issue of earthquake awareness and the roadway, if you would undertake to raise those issues with the relevant minister.
I'm grateful, Mr. President, and of course, And she went on. I mean, within context, I believe what she was submitting to us for consideration is critical. And I can assure you that there are already steps taken for the two things that you discussed. One is really in relation to the safety measures and other measures taken to ensure that we have a robust and resilient airport that can withstand. And you're asking for a proactive approach, and that is being done. You also mentioned the works that would be contiguous to it, and that would impact tourism and transport and just the social and economic environment in that area. And that is clearly being considered. You would be aware of expansions of the road and work that will be done going to St. Thomas. And there are other considerations in relation to how to treat with traffic and the area which is being done now in terms of evaluation, which will impact the airport in a positive way, it is hoped. Right? The plain and simple fact is that we have to ensure, and we are ensuring as a government, as best possible, in partnership with opposition and the entire Jamaica, that all of our considerations put sustainable development at the forefront. And that means we have to think and act for the long term. We have to ensure that what we're doing considers the best use and best value for our money, the little that we have. And so I assure you that that is being done, and I welcome you, if you have any further recommendations, to send them to me so that I can discuss them with the relevant authorities. That said, Mr. President, I crave your indulgence, Mr. President.
You ask for the approval of the motion.
I ask approval for the motion that has been
Thank you
proposed.
very much, Minister. And just before I do that, I just thank you for the manner in which you presented, and to the two persons, Senator Fraser-Binns and Senator Brown, who contributed. It certainly helped me to understand a bit more. The question is that the motion be approved. All in favor? Aye. Against? Absolutely. One of the things I can't understand, however, is that when you look, for example, at the airport road, and they did a track, and you'd be surprised to know the amount of people that walk out there in the morning and cycle. And they build a walking track, and then they put a light post they put a light post every 25 yards or whatever it is in the middle of the walking path. It really is a mystery to me how people think of these things. It's a mystery to me, but I'm sure it's not the UDC under this chairman that would have done something like that. There you go. Minister, next matter.
I'm glad I didn't yield to that temptation there. Mr. President, colleagues, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motions, notice of which I gave earlier, as it relates to the National Housing Trust.
Members, you heard the motion relative to the Housing Trust, and I ask for your approval. Those in favor? Against?
out of an abundance of caution, Mr. President, I will ask that the motion be approved. I'm advised.
I just did that. I beg your pardon? The same one. The clerk wants me to. The clerk wants me to do it again. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against?
Mr. President, it appears that we have completed the work for the day. And yes, we only have 2 speakers, and then we will have the suspension of the motion. So this is in relation to the motion from Senator Morris. It's an important motion. So, Mr. President, we'll have 2 speakers. We won't complete the deliberation on that motion, but I do open the debate to my colleagues for them to give their presentation. And this is in relation
Speaking about the part heard, or part heard, that's the right
part heard
phrase.
motion on
Part
disabilities.
heard motion that Senator Morris introduced.
That is so.
And I think that it was a member of your side to respond.
Yes, I will also hear, I'm told, from Senator Wentworth Skeffrey.
Wentz?
It's Wentworth? Oh, this time.
As in Wentworth Charles, you should know that.
I thought it was Wentz. I thought it was Wentz.
Misspell, in those days.
But I welcome their contribution, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Senator Brown was commenting on your JC full blue, but you have he is not of the college, but he have offspring up there.
Mr. President, I join in participating in this very important motion. And I want to start, President, this motion speaks about persons living with disability, and it's to me, a very sensitive issue and very important topic. And I want to start with a quote from Robert M. Hensel. He was an athlete that was born with a spinal defect. But he has a Guinness Book of World Record for the longest wheelie in a wheelchair of a little over 6 miles. And he said that I don't have a disability, I have a different ability. The human spirit, sir, is one of ability, perseverance, and courage that no disability can steal. President, this motion is important to me because I saw my own mother work for 35 years with children living with disability. And I today want to continue to commend her for that. And I want to commend all those persons in the National Children's Home, Tegwin House. And I want to commend all those persons who in life that worked or contribute to persons' life with disability. And Senator Braham, I just overheard you indicating that you thought I would have spoken about my disability. But
But I want you to understand something, because we all at some point in time would have gone through some level of disability. Take this away and ask me to read some things, I'm impaired. Understand, Mr. President, if you had a broken arm or leg, it's a temporary disability. Senator Lambert Brown, you remember when you had chikungunya? You would have had a temporary feeling of disability. Well, we should have both attended a meeting, and Senator Brown couldn't turn up. And he told me that he was in the same place for days because he was immobile.
Sorry, you know, I wanted to raise the issue of chikungunya in the Senate when President Morris was here, but he didn't regard it as being important enough for us to discuss.
But, Mr. President, the point I'm making is that there are those of us who have the ability, but we would have been disabled. And just imagine those persons who every day of their life, they have to try to live a normal life with disability. And so we must respect them for that. Mr. President, there are many barriers that affect persons with disability. The first one that comes to my mind is just this widespread ignorance, that they are not capable and they can't treat with certain things. And then there's a fear and stereotypes that have caused people with disabilities to be unfairly discriminated against in society and in employment. Mr. President, Jamaica must be steadfast in its effort to formulate policies to protect the rights of people living with disabilities. This unfair discrimination against people with disabilities are perpetuated in many ways. There's an unfounded assumption about their abilities and even their ability to perform on the job. And so, in the first instance, someone applies for a job, you don't see them, you don't know who they are. But when they attend the interview, you formulate your own opinion that they cannot do the work. And so the discrimination starts upon sight. So you don't know whether or not that person has the ability and the capability to carry out the functions. But I want to tell you, I have seen persons living with disability perform and exceed expectations of the job in many areas. Mr. President, even under the selection process, we discriminate unfairly. Senator Morris' motion speaks to the accessibility to Parliament. And I believe that if we are promoting accessibility to organizations, institutions, or any building, any place of work, as parliamentarians, let us start at home with that promotion. Let us start at home with that promotion. So we have challenges today, not only confined to Jamaica, but globally. The inaccessibility at workplace. Not even for the customers to be able to enter the workplace, but just the mere workers. We don't establish proper ergonomic principles in order for them to operate. And it means simply just that how you have to fit into the workplace. Mr. President, I was a little disappointed when this debate started and the report that came out of it. It suggested that senators clashed over the disabilities bill. And I understand the sensitivity of it. I understand that this is a very emotional topic. But it don't need us to fight and clamor over it. This is one area that as a country that we must be as collaborative as possible. And so, Senator Morris, you spoke of the code of conduct, the code of practice. That code of practice is a very important, effective tool. And I too share the question as to what is taking it so long. Because there's no way the passage of the bill into legislation can be effective without that code of practice for people with disabilities. And it must be seen as a broader equity agenda for people with disabilities to have their rights recognized. Senator Morris, I got a letter from the ministry that indicates that you have some fundamental role to play in that regard. That you are part of the team that is going to be working on this code. It doesn't matter. What is important is that the meeting should take place. And yes, it was this government who appointed it. One of the things though, one of the point I would want to make in this regard.
Congratulations, Floyd.
Oh, yeah, about that. Congratulations. And I'm going to be happy to meet with you, Floyd. As a matter of fact, I would invite you to my office and we have special parking just for you. But the question is, no, we have defined areas to where he will have accessibility. But the point is, Mr. President,
Senator Morris, if you pick up
if
any problems there, inform me.
If we have consultants that have been given certain specific mandates, specific responsibilities, they must do them work. They must do them work. And so, for those persons who were assigned this responsibility, I'm asking for a report to be presented of the status of what work that has been done. Mr. President, this code that we're speaking about protects people living with disabilities against unfair discrimination. It also is seeking to help employers and employees understand their obligations. It is also seeking to create awareness of the contributions that people with disabilities can make in society. So let us not be of the view that because persons are living with disabilities, they are not contributing effectively to society. And it also, Mr. President, once established puts affirmative actions and measures to redress the discrimination. Mr. President, the code itself, is a guide for organizations to establish, implement, and refine disability equity policies and programs to suit the needs of workplace and all institutions and organizations. So it's very important that the team that has been established craft this very important code, because some contents of it should include what means reasonable accommodation, how you treat with recruitment and selection, how you're treating with the placement of employees, how you treat with the training and career advancement of workers living with disability. And let me say this to you, you can't just determine on your own how you treat with their training and advancement without having consultations with them.
That's true. That's standard.
That's it. It also, Mr. President, because this discrimination against persons living with disability is because of the lack of awareness by people in the society. And so part of this code should also treat with the education and awareness in the society, to remove the level and the cloud, the dark cloud of discrimination. Mr. President, there are some persons who, given the nature of their disability, whether it's physical and in some aspects psychological, the question of confidentiality and disclosure is important. And this is what the code, a code of this nature, would be seeking to protect. So we really want to know what's the status of the code. And Senator Morris, now that we know you and there's a face to it, we expect report coming from you in this parliament.
Accountability.
No, we want to know, man. General conversation. We want to know. You can talk to us about it. Mr. President, creating the workplace. That's the day you went to it? That's very good. Excellent. So I thought you should have met with stakeholders. He's the only stakeholder. Mr. President, improving the workplace for the disabled workers is important. And creating a disabled-friendly workplace is a first step towards employing more qualified disabled candidates. A workplace which offers support and encouragement will help disabled employees perform to their full potential and be productive in whatever they do. And there are several things that companies and employers and HR practitioners can do. You know, I had to pause for that, because there's a moment to wonder. What I will do, Senator Skeffrey, is that I will ensure that I do what I'm supposed to do. Mr. President.
Members, just remember it's in my genes, right?
So, Mr. President, there are some tips in terms of that work culture, that friendly workplace. So we have to build awareness and invest in training. We also, and Senator Morris spoke about it, make use of the assistive technology that supports them. Assistive technology which enables disabled persons to be an active part of the workplace. It has grown leaps and bounds over the last few years. And most modern jobs require computers and the use of technology. Now, if your company was to invest in the right assistive technology, the apps, the online tools, disabled employees will be able to carry out their job responsibilities without impediment. And some common assistive technology includes, the color-coded keyboards, refreshable braille displays, specialized screen reader software, assistive listening device, speech recognition and sign language apps, and browsers. In the standing committee meeting, I sit beside Senator Morris, and he's sometimes way ahead of the game. Maybe sometimes a little too fast, and I have to restrain him. But the assistive technology has been a great assistance. And so it is encouraged that it should be part of the tools in the workplace to assist workers who are living with disability. Mr. President, the government of Jamaica, sir, recognizes the rights of persons with disabilities to have legitimate access to the labor market. And policies have been implemented in recognition of this right, as well as sensitization for employers to guide and to improve workplace interactions. The National Policy for Persons with Disabilities states that a minimum of 5% of jobs in the public sector should be reserved for persons with disabilities, provided that they possess the required qualification. Many persons, sir, are, however, unable to fill positions in the public sector, due in part of them lacking the requisite qualification. And so, Mr. President, there are measures that have been put in place in treating with that development. But, Mr. President, you have to protect workers who are living with disability. And I want to point to the Employment and Termination and Redundancy Payments Act. That it requires employees acquiring a disability on the job be made redundant and not dismissed. And the Act provides that the disability, injury, or disease acquired must be due to the nature of the job that renders the employee unable to work. And it breaks out the required compensation in these instances. However, President, I want to put it a little further. There are no measures in place that if that worker was to develop an injury on the job that would have created a disability, there's no measure that would facilitate re-employment after that redundancy. So exactly. But what we need to do is to find a way that we can retain that employment and reabsorb them into the system for continuous employment. Senator Morris, your motion starts out with the House of Parliament of Jamaica, through the Senate, commence the use of sign language for its sittings. President, I want to commend Ms. Aiken for what I heard, because I don't know when I see her doing all these things exactly what she's doing, but I've been told that she has been doing an excellent job. No, the thing about it is that we don't know what she's signaling, what she's communicating. But sign language is a very important skill. It's an art. And my own school, Arden, they have a club that teaches sign language. And I want to suggest, sir, Mr. President, and strongly encourage that the secondary school curriculum must have in place extracurricular activities that teaches this important language. That those of us who are not impaired must have the opportunity and ability to communicate with those who are impaired. So I want to suggest that. I want to strongly encourage it. Now, so the motion is promoting a change to our parliament to make it more accessible. And in your presentation, you made some recommendations. But outside of that, a study was done. Parliament of Jamaica, George William Gordon, House of Accessibility Audit Report, March 16th, 2015. So a study was done. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. No, I know that's not what you're suggesting, so don't fight me. Now I look at some of the recommendations, and the recommendations, President, are divided into stages. Stage 1 identifies the action items that can be completed immediately to provide a minimum baseline standard for the accessible route into the building. Stage 2 identifies larger renovations required to provide an accessible route to multiple stories and to accommodate a larger group of persons with disabilities. So what would happen if we have a run on this parliament of persons living with disabilities but have the interest to attend parliament? We're not prepared. We can't turn them back, but we're not prepared. Stage 3 aims to remediate conditions that were impacted by the renovations of stage 2. So it assumes that if you do some work with stage 2, you have to do some continuous work in order to ensure everything is in place. Now, the government has every intention to create a new parliament. And the chairman of the UDC was the first to clap. No, we don't believe that there's going to be any change of policy. But notwithstanding that, Mr. President, there are some things with this parliament that can be done and should be accommodated. Can be done. And I want to just you know, this is where my colleague and I will share a different view. Because first and foremost, my mindset and training is to treat with the hazards. And to treat with any unforeseen circumstances if we have persons attending the parliament and God forbid there is an emergency. Absolutely. So, but you see, the able-bodied persons may have a more advanced ability. Now, easily, it suggests in stage 1, replace the exterior sidewalk and entrance from the street corner north to the driveway entrance to provide a continuous ramp and zero-step threshold at the main entrance. It don't take much to do that. It don't take much to do that.
Yeah, that is true.
Provide accessible parking spaces located under the annex portion of the building, such that are protected from weather in the close proximity to the new accessible main entrance.
That's easy.
That's easy. Mayor, you know that's easy.
Just do it.
It says, create a remote viewing location at the Legislative House with appropriate audio-video feed. And a number of locations were discussed on the ground floor. Now here's another one that is easy. Provide customer service training to staff to understand the use and objectives of the viewing area and identify to staff how guests can be assisted to utilize this technology. It also suggests to create an accessible single-use washroom on the ground floor. Mr. President, under stage 2, it also spoke about the washroom. But listen to this one. Improve general safety within the Parliamentary House by integrating contrasting nosing strips, handrails, and hazard warnings where stairs are provided. Those are things that can be done, you know. It spoke about the lighting, to improve the lighting. Now, even those of us who are here sometimes have challenge with the existing lighting. So, Mr. President, there are some things that can be done that are recommended in this, at least for the medium term. At least for the medium term. Until we get to the new parliament.
That sounds like a big expenditure.
And it can be. But what it does is that it creates, yes. I know you can because you are very prosperous. But Mr. President, one of the things, you know, if as a country we have commissioned an audit, we commission a study and we pay money, let us utilize where possible those positive areas that has been recommended.
I agree with you.
And so, Mr. President, I'm strongly encouraging
let's do it.
that we examine those areas in this report that would have been conducted on up to March 16, 2015, and let us make the life better for those persons living with disability attending our parliament. So, President, no, don't ask me those questions because I have no idea. President, the motion put forward has merit to it. But we need to get to a stage in our society where we treat persons living with disability with the level of honor and integrity and respect that they deserve. And we must get in our minds to remove the level of discrimination against these persons. And so, President, every time that there's the opportunity to speak on these issues, I will be an advocate. May it please you, Mr. President.
All right. Thank you, Senator Gill. Senator Skeffrey.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I also stand to make my contribution on this motion. And in doing so, let me thank Senator Morris for so able to move this motion. A motion that was on the order paper from 2016, even before the decision was taken to build a new parliamentary building. So many of the issues in the motion were relevant then and still remain relevant today. I also want to commend him for his continued advocacy for the Jamaican people, especially those with disabilities. So therefore, I support this motion completely. No one can deny, Mr. President, the need for us as a society to make our current parliament building accessible to persons with physical disabilities. In doing so, we will enhance the ease of access, movement, and comfort among the special group of the Jamaican family. I have observed, Mr. President, many challenges experienced by individuals with physical disabilities when they come to their parliament. The difficulty experienced when walking up the stairs. I have seen persons from the Disability Association from time to time coming to joint select committees of Parliament to make various submissions. Mr. President, for them to come into the chamber, it is extremely difficult, a most difficult task, Mr. President. Not to mention those who seek to access the gallery. And we have seen many, many examples from time to time. In a 2019 Jamaica, here we seek progress and prosperity for all. This remains a shame on those who are in government, having the authority to make the change. Therefore, I see the call in this motion as a no-brainer, Mr. President. We need to find the money and just do it, and do it now, Mr. President. Mr. President, when you want to find money for other purposes, it is quickly found and often goes to waste and corrupt practices. 400 million from a waste used car deal that is still an outstanding matter could go a far way in order to fit in the parliament or to require changes to make our parliament friendly for members of Jamaican family with physical disabilities. Not to mention the alleged corruption and waste at CMU. Such resource could help to make this proposal a reality, Mr. President. If we add the waste and corruption at Petrojam, we would have enough money to retrofit the current building and leave a surplus, Mr. President. We need to just do it. Support our Jamaican family members as we seek to make their lives a better one and their freedom of movement more efficient, Mr. President. Mr. President, I also support the need for a new parliament building and to make it accessible to persons with physical disabilities, accessible to our children, elderly, and indeed to all our people. This new parliament will no doubt benefit the staff of parliament. At times I feel their pain as they carry out their duties in this current sick building. All the time. And in doing so, they still maintain the highest level of professionalism. We need to salute them and thank them, Mr. President. It will also definitely make the visitors to the People's Parliament more comfortable. Also greater comfort and space for the parliamentarians. It is clear to all that this current parliament building has outlived its usefulness. And indeed, for our national and civic pride, we all should collectively support this initiative, Mr. President. In this design, we need to ensure there are good research areas equipped with the latest technology to aid information gathering, sufficient office space for staff, and adequate conference rooms, rooms for committee meetings, adequate space, and separate chambers for both houses of parliament. Mr. President, I am also suggesting that we have an era to create an archive with the history of Jamaica, photographs and biographies of our leaders, past and present, information on our political system, on our national institutions, our national sites, symbols, among others. This will raise the national consciousness of our people, create a sense of national pride among them, example among our children, as we seek to develop a spirit of loyalty and love for country all the time, not just when you're doing well, example in sports, for example, track and field, but all the time in all areas we have the joy and pride for Jamaica land we love. We must include technology to digitalize the Hansard of Parliament, the records of Parliament, as we seek to enhance efficiency. That must be a part of the new thrust going forward. However, Mr. President, while I support this proposal, I want us to ensure that there's clear transparency in the award of the contracts. We need to ensure that the country will get value for money spent, and that the project finishes within time and budget. We must hold all players that will be involved in the project accountable, and they must all remember that they will work for the Jamaican people, the real boss, Mr. President. Mr. President, in supporting the motion also, I want to broaden this debate today and not just to focus on the current Parliament building or the new one to come, but indeed on all new public institutions to be built must cater for persons with physical disabilities. We must ensure that the plan submitted to the municipal corporations, Mr. Mayor and Councillor, speak directly to this in its design. And I hereby recommend that if no provision is made for this, such plans should not be approved, Mr. President. Mr. Mayor and Councillor, important. Let me repeat. We must ensure that the plans submitted to the municipal corporations speak directly to a plan for persons with disability. And I hereby recommend that if no provision is made for this, such plans must not be approved, Mr. President. Government must lead by example, and ultimately, this should become the policy for all public and commercial buildings. We must not, but it must be planned and enforced. We must not only talk the talk, but walk the walk, and therefore a clear timeline must be put to this. So I would recommend that by April 2020, no plan for new construction of government buildings and commercial buildings in all municipalities should be approved without clear provisions to accommodate persons with physical disabilities. This must also be a policy for all our schools, Mr. President. government ministries, agents, and departments. We must do this as we demonstrate the love and care for this important group of the Jamaican family, Mr. President. Mr. President, Labor Day 2018, there was a project started by the Ministry of Education based on a motion moved by Senator Morris to retrofit a number of schools with ramps so as to reduce the challenges faced by persons with physical disabilities. This project seems to have ground to a halt, Mr. President. Or is it under investigation like that of the former minister that had responsibility for it, Mr. President? We must revive this initiative, provide the required budgetary allocation, set a clear timeline, and I say no later than January 2021, so we can make this basic feature the norm in all our schools as quickly as possible, Mr. President. We must ensure that they are built according to the required specifications, so we have a standardized approach across the sector. Mr. President, another critical issue faced by our people with disabilities, and you made mention it earlier, Mr. President, is electrical posts, fire hydrants, and debris that are on the public sidewalks in our major towns and parish capitals. Where are the municipal corporation officers, the NAA officials, police, the fire departments, among others? I am sure they see this hazard daily, Mr. President. Are they just turning a blind eye, pretending that all is well? Mr. President, I also call on the Jamaica Public Service Company to design and implement a plan immediately to remove all electrical posts from the middle of our sidewalks. It's a shame and disgrace. And I give you a story, Mr. President. In the latter part of August, I was traveling from Ligani to Halfway Tree in the congestion on the road. And a person with visual challenges, blind person, walking on the sidewalk, Senator Brown. And in this post, in the fire hydrant, could not walk comfortably along. And the poor gentleman had to leave the sidewalk and come to the edge of the road. For him, he was moving freer, but the danger faced close to the traffic. So the sidewalk that should offer the safety and protection is now a nuisance to all pedestrians, but more so those with disabilities. And it's a long-standing situation, Senator, I agree. But all of us in a 2019 Jamaica must cry a shame on ourselves while in authority, and we must start the process of correcting it and correcting it immediately. And JPS must start that, and the government must lead that initiative and force JPS along with other agencies. It is a disgrace, and we must end it and end it now. What happened overnight? But we see them erecting it, and we turn a blind eye, Senator Singh, and pretending that all is well. We have to deal with it.
From Portmore, there's a light post in the middle of the highway.
Yes.
Where is it?
Mr. President, the only place that many of these persons who are visually challenged are those with wheelchairs must use so as to move around on a daily basis in the sidewalks. So if we are not making it safe for them, then we're not catering to their needs. The government must hold them accountable. That's JPS and other agencies. Sit with them in order to correct this inhumane situation, cruel situation, this injustice faced by this group of the Jamaican family when they use the public sidewalks. This cannot be the accepted reality in a 2019 Jamaica if we are serious about the notion of becoming a first world state. Mr. President, a first world state cares and protects the most vulnerable among them. We must wake up and get on board. Mr. President, as we continue to demonstrate the seriousness about supporting this group, I call on the government to continue to explore ways to make the gadgets cheaper that our family members in this group use to make their lives easier. Reduction in custom duties, GCT, are incentives to the Disability Society are some practical ways to explore. Whatever we seek to do, Mr. President, we must continue to cater for their needs as we seek to fully integrate all in our society as one Jamaican family, living and working the dream for an improved quality of life for all our people. Mr. President, if we are serious about supporting our family members with disabilities, then the government must hang its head in shame. And why I said that? Senator Gale spoke about it earlier. The disability bill was passed into law with great fanfare in 2014. 5 years later, no regulation to give life to this revolutionary act. The government needs to tell the nation why. It's a shame again. I don't want to believe it is a lack of care on the government's part, although that is not a difficult task for them to demonstrate. We need an update on this, Mr. President, and we need it now, a comprehensive update as to why and the way forward. As we continue to demonstrate our support for persons with disabilities, I hereby call upon the Minister of Education, although I'm not sure which one to appeal to, or better yet, the Ministry of Education, to provide an update on the diagnostic centers that should be in operation to fully assess our students, so as to determine if they have any challenges and the magnitude of such challenges that they might have that could retard learning. This is important to determine, Mr. President, so we can design and implement effective teaching and learning strategies as we seek to cater for individual variation in our classrooms. Where are we with this program? How many centers are in operation and where? What is the average number of students assessed on a daily basis, assuming that the centers are operating? Sir President, it is important that this information is provided to the public so parents would know where to go if there is a need. Also, is there a cost component to the diagnostic process? Mr. President, coupled with any diagnostic process is the need to modernize our classrooms with the latest digital technologies so as to cater for our learners. Many might be having learning challenges. Therefore, it is important to provide them with hands-on, minds-on, and practical approach to learning so as to motivate them and enhance their critical thinking skills. Key also, Mr. President, is the method of assessment employed to measure learning. This has to be authentic and in keeping with the individual variation in these learners. And Mr. President, I want to say it's full time. I think I made that call here previously in the Senate. But we have to modernize teaching and learning, training also. And every teacher in training must be a teacher or a specialist in special education. At least a minimum module must be done by all teachers. And I also want to go further. In a similar way, we have guidance counselors in our schools and social workers working with schools. That at a minimum, all high school must have at least one specialist education teacher. And then the ministry can also have another one in what is called the quality education circle to work with the primary schools. And you can have also some of these specialists attached to the early childhood commission. Because many of the challenges that we face with learning is as a result of the learning challenges that we have that go unidentified. And even when we identify them, the teachers don't have the capacity or the training to design the lesson plans, to design the assessment strategy, to cater for the needs of those learners. So if we have these trained specialists in our education system focusing on these issues, it will see to correct it. And if the teachers get a basic training on specialist education, then they will have a greater appreciation for the variation among our learners, and that no two students are the same, but they are all special and they can all learn and they must learn. And the system must respond to that and cater for the needs of all our children, irrespective of their social class. So we need to promote that, Mr. President. Mr. President, another key area that we must focus on for persons with disabilities, to include those with physical disabilities, is the challenge that they face when seeking employment, Senator Gill. I spoke about that. We need to remove the stigma and discrimination in a 2019 Jamaica that is still attached to this group of individuals in our Jamaican family. We need to evaluate a person based on the skill set that they bring to the organization or workplace, and not approach employment of these persons with a broad brush, Mr. President. We need to have greater public resistance against this practice that still exists in our society. And the media has a critical role to play in this regard. Let's look at our colleague, friend and brother, Senator Morris. He has been given the opportunity, and he has made significant progress and use of such opportunity. And there are many other persons from that disability community that is making worthwhile contribution in our society. But there are far too many that have not been given the opportunity. Not because they don't have the skill, not because they don't have the qualification, but because we still stereotype them and discriminate them and shut them out because of subjective approaches. We need to end that and give each person a chance to achieve their dream and live the Jamaica dream that we all hope for. You look at them, they're in sports. Next week, Saturday, you're going to have the road race for the disability community. They go to Paralympics. They're in football, blind cricket. They are living their normal lives. We just need to support them, encourage them, and give them the best chance. And domino and give person 6 love many times. I don't want to play domino with my colleague Morris, because I'm sure I get a 6 love. I don't want him to laugh at me. Many times. As a society, Mr. President, all our citizens with disabilities must be given their fair chance to climb the social ladder as they seek social upward mobility. So, President, we need to do this as a nation and remove all obstacles that blocks their natural path to progress. We need to do this if we believe in social justice, if we believe in economic empowerment for all our people. We need to do this if we want to break the back of inequalities in our society. We must do this as we seek to build a just, fair, equitable, progressive, and balanced society, and give all our people an equal opportunity to realize their full potential. So, President, let me just caution all of us in this honorable house. Take a time to reflect. Any one of us can be physically disabled tomorrow morning. Hence, we must ignite the flame of love, radiate the caring spirit for all as we seek to champion their cause. And I share a simple example. Sometime in June, a friend of all of us in the political movement that was always at our headquarters, no many calls on our behalf in talk show, just left the HQ, went across to the gas station to purchase a newspaper that morning, as he has done many mornings over the years. Came back across the road, on the sidewalk, few chains from HQ, less than a chain from PPHQ, and a taxi overtaking, reckless driving, went on the sidewalk, hit him down. Yes, and the extreme, he jumped to avoid. He's today in a wheelchair without his right leg. So the day before he was okay, today. Yeah, but he's now in a wheelchair. When that is one that hit us home. and you understand the reality. So those who seek to discriminate, they are myopic in their thought process, because it can happen to any one of us any day. We don't know the hour. From a health purpose, many persons appear to be healthy and strong, as throughout the day, and they are now a baby again, disabled. So we must appreciate everyone for who they are. And that's the reflection, that's the appeal I want us as a nation to do. And therefore, in that regard, Mr. President, when I look at the friend case that I just spoke to, because, Mr. President, I don't want to call any names, but you have set the records last week. I am calling on all our road users, Mr. President, motorists and pedestrians alike. Let us operate within the law. Cut your speed, motorists, and look out for each other. Look out for our children and elderly. In fact, for all road users. But, Mr. President, I call on the government also to provide us with an update as to where we are with the implementation of the new Road Traffic Act.
That could save some.
Where are we with the regulation? We need this regulation now if we are to give true life to the act, so we can use it as a tool to reduce road traffic accidents, deaths, or disabilities that often result from these accidents. It's imperative, Mr. President. Mr. President, also think about the numerous persons who are suffering as a result of gun shootings, disabled, and can no longer live a normal life. We need to call on the government to come up with a crime plan so we can reduce murders, shootings, and ultimately physical disabilities within that result from shootings. SOE is not a crime plan, Mr. President. And as we come down, we need a massive public education campaign using new and traditional media so as to educate our people about the various disabilities and to raise awareness. We need a public education campaign to raise awareness, promote a greater level of consciousness and care among our people as we seek to protect this group of people among the Jamaican family, our family, Mr. President. And Mr. President, in closing, we have the report. We have the report, Mr. President. And we just ask us to take the basic recommendations from the report and let's implement it.
Let's do it.
Let us protect our people with disabilities, physical disabilities to be included. If we want to achieve the vision of 2030, a Jamaica that we can live, raise families, and do business, and all our people can enjoy the quality life that they deserve, and free of discrimination, and moving in one accord as a happy Jamaican family. I support the motion. Let us just get this parliament ready for people with physical disabilities as we wait on a new parliament. And this motion must be supported, not just by words, but by deed, Mr. President. I rest my case. Thank you, Senator Morris. Thank you again for this motion.
Thank you, Senator Skeffrey. It's 1:20, Leader.
Time now being 1:21, Mr. President. I ask for the suspension of the Senate, standing orders, so that we can sit beyond 1:30.
The question is that the standing orders be suspended to allow the Senate to sit beyond 1:30. Those in favor? Against? Minister? I take it that we're going to suspend the debate on... Okay, so we just ask for that.
Simply asking for the suspension of the debate until a date to be settled, Mr. President.
The question is that the debate on Senator Floyd Morris's motion be suspended for a future date. Those in favor? Against? Minister?
Mr. President, there is one matter which will be attended to. Besides that, or except for that, there are no other matters that we will be attending with in relation to the bills that were put before this Honourable Senate. So I just want to thank my colleagues for their contribution, and I believe we'll move forward to the motion on adjournment. Yes, asking for the adjournment, sir.
Senate be adjourned to a date to be fixed.
Mr. President, I rise on the motion for adjournment to bring a matter to the attention of this Honourable Senate, and the matter being the horrific attack on the teacher from St. Richard's Primary School by the 4 pit bull dogs. We shudder in trying to imagine the harrowing and nightmarish ordeal that this teacher suffered. We wish her a speedy recovery, both physically and emotionally. We thank God for sparing her and hope that the psychological scars will be minimal. Mr. President, this is not the first attack on citizens by ferocious dogs who have not been properly secured by their owners. Not to say that that has happened in this case. And such attacks have often resulted in critical injury and even death. The frequency of such attacks demands immediate attention of legislators, our immediate attention, as the law in its present form does not capture criminal liability for the owners of the dogs. I support the suggestion that citizens may need, because it's a popular suggestion in the public space, that citizens may need a license to own vicious dogs such as the pit bull. And there are even suggested requirements such as specification of the height of the fence, ability of owner to control the animal, consideration as whether or not owners should be allowed to walk these dogs in the public space, or whether or not they should own them, or if they should be owned by security providers. We are relieved that the Minister of Justice, the Honourable Delroy Chuck, is considering repealing the current law, which could see, among other things, owners becoming liable. And, Mr. President, indeed, this is something that should have happened a long time ago. Mr. President, we urge citizens to secure their dogs on their property. They must not be at risk to people who are going about their regular business, people who are not trespassing, people who are just living their lives, as was that teacher who met this misfortune. Many Jamaicans can recount incidents of being chased and bitten by dogs. Many have had to tiptoe past certain gates because they know that, you know what, that gate, the owner usually leaves it open and they may be rushed or attacked by the dogs. The result would have been very different, Mr. President, had it been a child. Several children all over Jamaica are terrified of dogs because they have been chased by them. People need to take responsibility for their animals. For example, Mr. President, when dogs kill goats, and the farmers, they cry about this all the time. They just have 2 goat kill 3, and you'll have a pack of dogs that just wipe out a chunk of their livestock. That can't be fair because it is the farmer who has to withstand this loss. Out of this, and what I say, once that happens, they get more vicious. Out of this unfortunate attack must come a raft of decisions on how we treat with these issues. We cannot consider stray dogs all over our communities as acceptable. Neither should we mistreat animals. Mr. President, nobody should be attacked by vicious dogs because the owner forgot to close the gate. Nobody should be attacked because the owner did not remember to repair the gate or check to see if there is some hole in the fence. Sometimes, sorry just isn't enough when you have lost livestock, when you have been badly injured, when there is loss of life. Sometimes sorry does not cut it. They say sorry can't buy soldier lorry. Mr. President, let us continue to pray for our teacher, her family, the school family, and all Jamaicans who have been affected by this. Jamaicans, I'm encouraging you, secure your property, chain up your dog them. Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Morris. Senator Scott Motley. Senator Morrison. Senator Scott Motley.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I felt very similar to my sister senator when I heard about the vicious attack on a teacher who was merely going for getting some exercise. There are many other aspects of the account which are equally horrifying. One is that there were 4 dogs. 2 is that although it was fortunate that somebody was in their backyard and heard the screams for help, when they arrived at the scene, the viciousness of the dogs kept them at bay. They did call the police station, only to be told that they knew it was happening, but there was no vehicle to come and assist. And I think in all of this, one also has to acknowledge the response of a police officer who eventually found his way there and was able to discharge a firearm which repelled the dog somewhat. So it is a sad tale of a woman being mauled for over 4 hours. I cannot for a moment imagine what she went through and how, pardon me? That is what I can only go by the reports and the interviews which were done with the persons there. It's that kind of trauma is unimaginable because Jamaicans are afraid of dogs. That is why they provide effective security and do keep people outside of your environs. But you know what frustrates me is that it is only when we have an event like this that the entire society becomes galvanized about the outcome and then it abates. The fact is, Mr. President, that pit bulls are banned from entering our island. And how they come here is that there's a vast illegal trade. But if they are here and they are banned, the authorities must do something about them when they discover their presence. It cannot be business as usual after we forget about this incident. I recall very well the trauma associated, because this was 2016 and the child was 4 years old and the attack was in Manor Park. And respectfully, it was Minister Chuck who went on air and promised everything. Every single thing. I remember, because the irony of it is when I heard him on, I think it was Nationwide, when I heard him, his words that he used, they were almost exactly the same he had used in 2016. In 2018, then Minister Shaw had similar things about banning the importation of dogs, of vicious animals. I don't know what it was that led to the minister saying that he was going to pass legislation to ban the importation of dogs. What struck me was that the ban already existed but was simply not being enforced. Yeah. And Senator Morrison, what I would want to say is that this time the difference you must make is to follow through on what you're feeling now and to ensure that your colleagues take this matter one step further by implementing the law. In this regard, the fines were, I think, $1,000 for breach. That should have been looked at when we were amending monetary penalties, to make people know that the government is signaling in a very serious way how they view these infractions. So I support you. I just want now that something is to be done. And there are some things which can do, sometimes the solutions are simple. You spoke about the stray dogs. Somebody else spoke about the fact that they are locally bred and they are crossed so that you have mongrels on the road with these tendencies. We can, for example, see if JSPCA can, spay them. And in that way, they lose their viciousness. You know the one I'm talking about is all where they reduce the... Help me, Mr. President, because it's something they used to do with men when they castrated them. So
you know that they find that when they do that with when they do that with the animals, it don't reduce their hostility,
Well, that is not what has been said.
Like to castrate them.
The castration.
It don't really affect if the tendency is there. That it doesn't affect it.
I'm not sure about the actual forensic word, but I do know that there is something that can be done to make them less vicious. And I feel that we have to explore every possible avenue. Those dogs should not be around. But Senator Morris, respectfully, I cannot advocate still putting them away in that fashion. I'm looking for a gentler, what I'm trying to do is find a gentler way so that the real problem that we face can be confronted. Of course, if we can't do it that way, then we have to resort to very drastic measures. But, Mr. President, not another year of this.
Remember that Senator Morrison, do you remember that an elderly citizen was killed?
He was 66 years old.
At only 66?
He was 66 years old. So no, I'm only pointing it out to you.
That was at Angels in St. Catherine.
I'm only pointing it out to you, Mr. President, because when one gets old, closer to that age, you don't look so elderly. Right? So I'm just reminding you. He was actually 66 years old, and he actually died in the hospital while they were trying to operate on him. So, absolutely. So the point that I'm making is that it's not a new event, but it is an event which gives us now the possibility to call on Minister Chuck to follow through and criminalize it, and to call on those authorities to enforce the law. And when they find those dogs coming in on all those boats, don't allow them to enter. Don't allow them to enter, because that's how they actually get here. Somebody just turns a blind eye, and you have monkeys, you have all kind of animals which we should not have here being permitted to be here. Which ones? Now, if we could only deal with that, Senator, can you imagine what a Jamaica we would have? All of our visions for 2030 would be achieved if they stopped turning a blind eye to the illegal importation of guns. So, Mr. President, let's make this a moment, a teaching moment, and a moment which will lead to real strong action being taken, if it pleases you.
President,
not Angels. You know, the one thing I would say is that I know that the veterinary services that are responsible for enforcing these bans really work very hard. And I know as a fact that the process of importing a dog legally into the country is not an easy one. I know quite a few of the persons who are involved in the process. But like everything else, the difficulty is that these things are imported illegally. So I would like the members of the Senate to be of the view that the veterinary services are not working, because as Senator Morris was to say, if you try to import a dog that doesn't fall within the rigors of the policy, you're not getting a license to do so. And there is a process of keeping the dogs in quarantine, etc. But the issue is the importation of the dogs through the illegal process, yes. Minister?
Mr. President, having dutifully completed all of our matters for the day, we ask for the adjournment of the Senate until a date to be set.
Thank you very much. And may I just thank everybody for a very productive session this morning, and thank the Minister Charles for the way in which he presented the bills today. The question is that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed. Those in favor? Against? This Honourable Senate now stands adjourned.
The greatest benchmark of a country is its commitment to serving its people. The arm that extends to support, the smile that offers hope. Members of